Everybody, welcome to International Podcast Day 2017. We are continuing our conversation and our celebration of the power of podcast this International Podcast Day. We are just waiting to get Mike Moody from Permanent RCRD as our next speaker. He's going to be talking about the challenges of building a podcast studio. Mike Moody is based here in the United States. He is a former TV critic for AOL TV and other online publications. He's the founder of Permanent RCRD, a podcast collective in Austin, Texas, focused on producing high-quality podcasts for TV and pop culture obsessive. Mike co-hosts the podcast Mr. Robot, Oh the Marvel, TV Binge, and Star Trek Discovery Pod. He's been podcasting for close to 5 years and also is a podcast editor and producer. Hey guys, how you doing this morning? All right, we can't hear him quite yet. Make sure you guys check your settings real fast. In the meantime, I'm going to be going over the sponsors of International Podcast Day 2017. Thank you to Blueberry. Blueberry is a full-service podcasting company, a turnkey solution that will allow a new or veteran podcaster to get set up and running within 15 minutes. Get started at blueberry.com. Studio 21 Podcast Cafe is a full-service cafe with 2 working podcasting and video casting studios. The grand opening happens September 30th, where they will be broadcasting live throughout the day. Learn more and visit them at studio21podcast.cafe. The Messengers, a podcast documentary, is a journey through the modern world of podcasting, uncovering the magic behind why podcasters do what they do. Get your copy of The Messengers in iTunes and Amazon by visiting themessengersdoc.com. Podable, looking for your next favorite podcast? Podable revolutionizes podcast discovery by providing podcast recommendations tailored to you specifically. Start by going to play.podable.co. That's play.podable.co. And finally, thank you to the Audacity Podcast, Modern Life Podcast Network, and Podbean. Mike, do we got you on the line? All right, just 1 second while we work out a few of the little technical issues here.
Are we live?
Hey guys.
Hey,
Yeah,
can you hear us now? Okay,
Absolutely.
great. Sorry about that.
Hey, not a problem. Yeah, hey, it's tech, man. It is what it is, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I was hoping we would get to talk to you a few minutes before so we could figure out the tech, but that didn't happen, but no problem.
Yeah, we're good, man. Hey, so I already introduced you. I know Mike. Let's introduce the gentleman sitting right next to you.
This is Kyle Scott.
Hello.
He is
Hey,
a
Kyle.
member of the Permanent RCRD Podcast Network.
Permanent RCRD.
Permanent RCRD. I love the graphic back there on the tripod.
yeah.
It looks really cool.
Awesome, thanks.
Yeah. Well, you guys are off and running. We
Okay.
really look forward to your contribution to International Podcast Day 2017. Mike, I really appreciate you reaching out via our website and saying, hey, I got this message I want to share about the ins and outs of creating a podcast studio, making it on a dime, making things efficient and sound really good. So we're really looking forward to hearing your expertise as a podcast editor and a consultant as well. So we look forward to it. Guys, enjoy.
All right, right on.
Nice.
We're taking it from here, man.
All right.
So my name's Mike Moody from the Permanent RCRD Podcast Network. And this is Kyle Scott.
Kyle Scott, also from Permanent RCRD, where I'm on a show called The TV Dudes.
Kyle is a co-host of the TV Dudes. By the way, we're in Austin, Texas in our podcast studio.
Located on the beautiful South Congress Avenue. We got this great view of the Capitol building, the Capitol of Texas, that is.
Yeah.
Yeah, just a really, really fun spot.
So we wanted to take a little time to talk to you about building a podcast studio, and really I guess the inspiration for building a studio for us was so we can have a hub, so we can get all the podcasters on our network to work together and just have a space, not only where we could record, but where we can do video. We can launch new projects. I know, Kyle, you're thinking of launching a narrative video project.
Yeah, we're actually sitting right now in our one of two studios. This is the studio dedicated to video only, but we have another studio across the hall that is for audio only, which is 100% of what we're doing thus far.
Right.
We've done a few. We've been playing with video and live video recently. We've been learning OBS, Open Broadcaster software. I'm sure if you're a podcaster who's in any kind of live video, you know what we're talking about. And we recently did a live stream of the Emmys where we had our TV review crew kind of talking smack while the stars were giving their speeches.
Yeah, and that was great. And again, how many shows do we have on the network? We have Mr. Roboto. We have the new Star Trek pod.
Yeah.
We have TV Dudes. We have This Is Us with Key and Clyde. We have TV Pilot Watching, also with Key and Clyde. And we have FemTV and Gilmore. So that's like, what, 6, 7? I don't even know. I didn't even count.
Did you even say Marvel TV Bench?
And Marvel TV Bench.
Yeah.
So I was like using my fingers to count, and then I don't remember the number. So yeah, we have like maybe 7 or 8 podcasts. And all of us live in Austin, most of us. We have two co-hosts who are remote. One's in Canada and one's in Seattle. So we always patch them in via Zencastr or Skype. But most everyone on the network who does a show for the network lives in Austin. And Kyle, I know you live way south Austin.
Yeah.
Like a number of people on our network. I live way north Austin.
Romeo and Juliet over here.
Yeah, but we're together.
Montagues and Capulets.
I'm a Montague, bro.
Well, I'm cool with being a Capulet. Yeah, John Leguizamo was a Capulet, right?
That's true. Yeah. Oh, I'm mixing them up.
Damn. Oh, maybe not. Maybe I'm wrong.
You got the good one.
Let's just thank God that Shakespeare casted John Leguizamo.
That guy's good.
Yeah, Shakespeare's good at casting.
when is he gonna do a podcast?
Man.
So yeah, we all live in like extreme parts, different parts of Austin. So we wanted a location, and this is a good tip if you're starting a podcast studio in your city. Try to find a central location. Don't have everybody going south. Don't have everybody going north or out of town. Find a central location. So that's a big reason why we're located in central Austin. And we wanted to find a place that is quiet and that has at least 2 rooms that we could fit out. I don't know what your needs might be if you're making a podcast studio, but like Kyle said, we wanted a video studio and an audio studio.
So there's some of you who are probably watching us right now who are like, I don't need that. I've got my closet and I got my mic in my closet and all that. Or me and my friends, we meet up at my buddy's place because he has a man cave. So it's the perfect place to do our podcast. Like, all these are great options. And if you're starting a podcast, yes, definitely utilize a dining room, a kitchen, someplace without a lot of echo. But here's what's nice about making the step that we've taken to finding a dedicated space. We've talked a lot already about how regionally we had some issues with, recording at different people's houses. There was always somebody who had to do a lot of traveling. So the central location is nice. But something else that I didn't realize when we moved into this space, the space is great for collaborating. We've come out here not to record a podcast, but to talk about projects, to do things like that. And that tends to be harder to do, to get people to all meet up for like a brainstorm or for, meetings and things. So having this centrally located spot where we can all just come to have like a powwow has been really nice. And I feel like we're building on our network and we're coming up with new shows because of these meetings that we've been having out here at the space.
I think so, yeah. There's, like 15 of us in the network, so it's great to have a central location where we all can just come together and hang out and brainstorm. So I kind of wanted to talk about the essential things that you need to have for a podcast studio.
Good call.
One is a mini fridge full of beer.
Oh, yeah. I mean, before
you need it.
Anything else,
yeah,
you need a mini fridge.
It's stacked with local IPAs and local ciders. I think there's a few waters in there too.
Pro tip, our mini fridge provided to us by Grant, who's one of the friends who helped start this place, doubles as a kegerator. So when we don't have it filled with beer, we can pull the racks out and we can actually stick a keg in there, and we have a tap coming off the top. But the beer fridge is nice because when you've got fans in from out of town, or even fans who are in town, they need something to drink if they're going to come listen to you gab for an hour.
Yeah. And what's great about, another great thing about our podcast studio, and definitely an essential, you want a comfy couch in there. Because, okay, we have this is our video studio, but in our audio studio, we have a setup with a desk, 4 mics, they're all on stands. We have 4 dynamic mics, and we can throw in a few different mics if we need to. But facing that setup is a really nice, comfy futon. With nice padding. So we've actually had people sit there and watch us record as an audience. And that kind of brings, just having people watch you, I don't know. It
brings an energy to it.
It definitely brings an energy to it. Yeah.
And I feel like, too, anybody who is serious, now granted, there's going to be some people who the podcast, it's going to be therapeutic in some way, like a journal. And they're not really looking at growing an audience or catering to the listeners as much. But for somebody who is like marketing their show and growing an audience, it's hard to invite people you've never met before to your house. So with having the dedicated space and then also having kind of this seating area where people can view and spectate, it allows us to like reach out to more people and invite people out to come listen to a live show.
So let's talk about soundproofing.
All right.
Not necessarily soundproofing, but sound treating. Because when I was first, researching how to make a podcast studio, I was looking up soundproofing. But what you don't want to do is soundproof. You want to sound treat. They're 2 different things. So I know a really easy way to sound treat an environment to record audio. And the reason you want to sound treat is because you don't want reverb or echo bouncing all over the walls as you're talking, as you're recording, and bouncing back into your mic. I think most podcasters know that. So a really easy way to do that is to get a bunch of drapes and hang them all over the walls. And I think, do you listen to Pod Save America, those guys?
Infrequently. Yeah. It's not one of my go-tos.
Okay, well, I listened to them, and I was taking a look at their new podcast studio. It's Crooked Media, that's what they're called. And they basically have a conference room with a table with some nice Shure SM7B mics, and the walls are just covered in black curtains. So I was looking at that, and I was like, yeah, that definitely will help with sound, and you're not going to get a lot of reverb, and your podcasts are going to sound pretty good.
Yeah.
But it looks so drab. I was like, if I were to walk in that studio, I would not be. There's no energy.
Yeah, put a fern in there or something, guys.
Yeah, come on. Neon sign, something.
Yeah.
So we didn't want that. We wanted to find a balance between sound treating and helping with that echo and reverb so we get good recordings on our podcasts, and also have something that looks good. So when you walk in, you want to hang out there. And the way we achieved that was with really bright colors and painting. In this room, we made a couple of different, as you're seeing behind us, wood panel walls that I think this room was just such a drab office before. But now it has this great background, and you're not seeing to the left and right of us, but there's some really nice paint and trim. So when you walk in here, and there's big windows, so when you walk in here, you feel energized. Same thing with our audio studio. You walk in there, and just those bright colors, I think, you feel energy when you walk in there, and there's big windows too. But also we wanted to sound treat it. So what we did was we put a number of foam panels in certain spots all over the wall. So what you got to do is figure out where your mic placements are going to be, and then do some tests. So do some recording tests and see how much echo you're getting in your mic in your space, and then figure out where that echo is coming from, and then treat those parts of the room. So we identified a few spots on the walls, some corners. So then we just put some foam padding. We have pretty minimal foam padding in the other studio. It's not like just covered in black foam. It's minimal. but it works. So
you know, another tip too when you're applying that foam padding.
Yeah.
I've seen people, if you're using a room that has bookshelves in it, it's really easy to take these foam panels and then just place them on the shelf in front of the books.
Mm-hmm.
You can turn an entire bookshelf into a sound panel wall with less panels, and it's something that you can take down if you need to use that room for something else. Granted, we're talking about the dedicated space, but I know a lot of you are probably still working out of home spaces.
Yeah, if you're working out of home space, you actually, bookshelves with a bunch of books on them are great. Like, I know you guys used to record TV Dudes at your co-host Randy's house, and Randy has a
comic book shop in his home.
Yeah, it's I can't count the number of bookshelves that are in there and the number of comic books that are in there, but those work really well for absorbing sound too. So if you're a comic book or a book collector, if you have a library, that might be a good spot to record your podcast in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, another thing too, the floors can also do a lot. Not even just in terms of like carrying sound, but like vibrations on your equipment, you know, whether it's cameras or microphones that may be on like a hardwood floor or a laminate floor. In those situations, rugs or carpeted floors are really much better for not soundproofing, but what'd you call it before? Sound
treating.
Sound treating.
I would say that's a necessity. Like we have carpet and rugs in both of our studios, and if we didn't have that, everything would just be bouncing even worse than it is now. Like this room, the video room is still under construction.
Yeah, we have not sound set, or why do I keep sound setting? You literally just said it. Sound treating.
Just think of the great actor Treat Williams.
What? Okay, we haven't sound treated this room
We
yet.
have not sound Treat Williams this room.
Oh, yeah. Sound treating. You are killing me over there.
You're welcome.
So this sound probably isn't a great example of what we're talking about.
Yeah.
But hey, if you want to hear what we're talking about, we've got a ton of podcasts for you to listen to over at permanentrcrd.com.
Yeah, it's permanentrcrd.com. And another reason we wanted to build a podcast studio and a video studio was, and I know a lot of people watching this probably think, well, how do you make money? Well, we do monetize our shows via Patreon, and we're looking for certain sponsors for some of the shows. But another way that we're looking to monetize what we do in our space is by renting out our studio. So, and that was another reason to get a good central location in our city, a location that everyone knows, a popular neighborhood, everyone knows, and just a good accessible spot within any part of town. So we're lucky enough to find a building for relatively inexpensive where we can have two really good spots. So,
and that, I gotta say, is probably gonna be your biggest challenge when trying to find a dedicated space in your city. If we took the time to actually go through, you know, how we came about this space, the thing that would keep coming out of your mouth is, wow, you guys got really lucky.
We did.
A lot of it is, you're not gonna go and look in the, you know, the real estate section of the paper. I guess people don't paper anymore. You're not going to get a real estate broker.
What's the internet? Is that what that's called?
The internet. No, you're not going to be looking to rent a place that, like, say, a commercial business would be looking to rent. What you're wanting to do is you want to get creative. You want to talk to people you know who already own businesses, who may have extra space. You know, granted, we're in kind of a commercial area, but I mean, I've seen people turn guest houses, garages, add-ons, things like that into bonus rooms. Maybe you don't have a garage or a shed in your backyard, but your uncle does. Actually, here's a funny story. In college, I played in a metal band.
No, you didn't.
Yeah, I did.
No. What was it called?
That one was All Lights Green.
I like that.
Yeah, but now you tell me, nobody liked that name. Everybody made fun of me.
You were ahead of your time.
Exactly. But no, so we needed a place to practice. And then, you know, with like music, just like with podcasting, you have a lot of equipment. We ended up using the attic at my friend's grandmother's house because she was hard of hearing. So we could blare the music as loud as we want, as late as we want, and she could still fall asleep, no problem.
So I'm looking for apparently there's a chat that goes along with this.
Ooh.
So maybe
if
we can find the chat on our computer, you can ask us questions about our network, about the studio, and we'd be happy to answer those. So let's look.
It'd also be great. Could you go ahead and post on our social media the link, because we got it kind of late, and my phone died when I was trying to post it. So
cool.
None of my friends are probably watching right now.
Aw. Okay, so we are on the chat, and let's see if we have any questions yet. I can't read any of this. Okay, it's really just people really excited that the hashtag International Podcast Day is trending.
Oh, wow.
Great.
Nice.
Good job. Glad Trump's not trending.
Yeah. Gosh. That's how we know we've made it, when he starts talking shit about our hashtag.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I'm gonna tweet that out. But Kyle, do you have any questions? Like, I know you've been using the studio for several months, and it's relatively new. Like, we opened up this studio for ourselves, I want to say under 6 months ago, maybe like 3 months ago.
Yeah.
And so we're just kind of learning really still how to use it. We haven't opened it up to the public to rent it out yet. That's coming probably closer to the new year. So if you are in Austin and if you're interested in using our podcast studio, just go to permanentrcrd.com and shoot us an email. But do you have any questions about the studio right now?
Well, you know, before we get into that, you know, another tip that I wanted to mention, and this is something that I'm very bad about, but Grant and Mike are really good about, which is when you have a communal space like this, it's really important to have a scheduling solution. We use Google Calendar, so we know who's using the space at what times, because it's really easy to overlap. And like our space on Sundays and on certain nights of the week, there's other people in this building, and they, you know, are playing music or doing things like that. So it's not ideal for audio recording. For the most part, though, keeping everybody on the same track, it's been very helpful. We haven't run into any problems where like we've double booked or, you know, people have gotten upset that they couldn't come in and use the space.
So someone tweeted, you have beer. Great work, guys. That is an essential key to making a good podcast.
I believe so.
And to having a good podcast studio. You want to have a good assortment of libations, because that also brings people over. Sometimes, you know, you're a podcaster. This has happened to you. You schedule a podcast. It's 20, 30 minutes after the podcast was going to start. Your buddy hasn't shown up. He just flaked on you. If you had beer.
Would he flake?
Would he flake?
The answer is no, he wouldn't have flaked.
If you have good craft beer. Yeah.
Anybody watching this, the only thing better than having a stocked beer fridge in your podcast studio is having a stocked beer sponsor for your podcast studio. All right? Where's that guy in the chat?
Yeah, well, where are you, beer sponsor?
We have 0 beer sponsors, which means we're not even picky. You can have shitty beer and send it to us. And early days, we're going to give you a little shout out.
Yeah, Schlitz, we're here.
Oh my gosh. Hams.
Lone Star's good now, right? That's a good.
I like Lone Star. Yeah. Rainier's, all you Pacific Northwest people.
Yeah, Rainier. Yeah.
Rainier's.
It's just turning into a beer commercial.
Yeah.
Apologies. But yeah, I do encourage anybody in the chat, if you have any questions about building a podcast network, any questions about building a podcast studio, just drop it in that chat and we'd be happy to answer you.
I'm going to go back to the beer, all right? Because a lot of people probably aren't taking us very serious about this beer thing.
And he's drunk right now. So.
Here's the serious note. Here's the takeaway. You need a plan, especially if you're hosting a podcast or you're trying to get friends who maybe aren't as enthusiastic as you are. You need a plan for not only getting them to come and join in without money. I mean, obviously, if you have money to pay your friends, hopefully they would take that. But most of us are not getting paid nor have any intentions to pay people to do this. So what is your plan? You know, if it's not beer, you know, maybe it's, you know, bringing a thing of cookies. Gosh, what are some other ones? A friend of ours has a gigantic Blu-ray collection. So what happens is when you record podcasts with him, you almost get membership to his exclusive video store where he loans out anything you want, and he has everything. He loans out things that you want. So now, in order to return that, which he keeps a record, but in order for you to return that, you have to come back and record another podcast with him. So he constantly has this stream of his friends who are, you know, picking up and dropping off these movies. And then it's like, hey, let's throw the mics up and let's do a show real quick. So yeah, so having a plan for, you know, and
really motivating people to show up and do the work.
It's the same concept as the craft services table, you know, on the set of a movie. You know, even if you're shooting a short film with like 5 of your friends, you got to have pizza or something there, or they're not going to come and do it again with you.
Right.
There's just not really a whole lot of incentive.
Yeah.
And something really small like pizza goes a lot further than you would think.
And going back for the what the space is used for, to recap, we do podcasts, audio podcasts. We're starting video projects, YouTube projects, and even video podcasts that we hope to put on our YouTube channels. But both spaces also serve as editing suites. We're still working on the video studio for that, but the audio studio next door has, and this is what you need definitely if you want a shared podcast studio. You want shared accounts to, well, we use Adobe. So we use Adobe Audition. We have a shared Adobe Audition account that everyone can log into. Everyone who has access can come in and log in on the same computer. We have a very fast iMac with a very large screen in the other computer, in the other room. And we also, you know, different podcasters like to use different tools. So not only do we have Adobe Audition on that computer, we make sure it's loaded with everything from Audacity to GarageBand, and I think Hindenburg is even in there. Nice. So if you want to come in here and you're used to recording on your laptop, and you want to use Hindenburg or whatever, you can do that. So I would definitely suggest, if you're building a multi-use or multi-purpose podcast studio with different people using it, have a number of options, because podcasters are, we like our tech, but we like our specific tech, right? So I know for a long time, I wouldn't touch anything beyond Audacity because it was a free program and it's really easy to use. But then I kept reading about Adobe Audition, so I tried that out. And then I know TV Dudes, Grant likes to record a lot with GarageBand. So it's like, okay, we need to have all of these things. So we have them all. And then when we rent the space out to other podcasters in the city to use, they can see that they have their favorite program here. So that's definitely a good tip. Have a number of different audio programs. And I guess we can just talk about the gear that we use.
You know, while we're still on audio programs, this is kind of backwards, but I actually more often than not use Final Cut Pro to record audio.
How does that work?
Well, so it's very simple, but they have a voiceover option within Final Cut Pro. The reason I like it is because I love to edit my my segments that way. It tends to be very visual, kind of like GarageBand, and I don't have a lot of experience in Audacity or any of the other programs that have been mentioned.
Yeah, you're more of a video filming.
Yeah.
So we do have one question here. What's the one major challenge of creating a studio? Cost, time, or patience? If I had to narrow it down to one, and I guess I am the co-creator or the co-founder of the studio. Kyle,
and so modest.
My other co-creator and co-founder, Grant Davis, couldn't be here today. He's with family. But Grant and I spent a lot of this, everything that you mentioned here, commenter, we spent a lot of time, we spent money, and we definitely ran out of patience a few times, maybe with each other, maybe with the project as a whole.
Yeah,
putting this thing together.
Yeah, so if you can have one of those things, easily patience. Be patient with your project, be patient with your collaborators. I think the one thing on there that shouldn't discourage you is money, because that is the one component where you can be very creative. You can take stock in what you already have. You can find new opportunities, as long as you don't think of it as, I need this money to do this thing. If you don't have the money, then think of, how can I do this thing without the money?
Yeah.
You know, whether that's the equipment that you need or the space that you need, there are creative ways to get it done. Heck, I mean, most people's cell phones now have a nice enough microphone to where you could record, you know, some semblance of a podcast and get started while you're, you know, saving up money or building up that studio you're trying to get started.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that about being creative with the money aspect, because I'm not going to go into it, you know, with too many details, but the reason that we have such a great dedicated space for our podcasts and video podcasts in the middle of one of the most popular neighborhoods in Austin, in Central Austin, is because I had a connection, right? And so if we were to—
His pot dealer lives here.
If, if we were to rent out a space like this where we are now, we would have to get extremely creative to get that money together. But
what did we use? We used creativity and lots of patience.
yes.
I mean, we did this for a year before this place came about, right?
Yeah. We had the network together for a year. But I guess my original point was that—
Sorry about that.
No, my original point was that we looked at our options within our friend circle and our family circle and said, who would be excited about what we're doing and who would want to help either on a monetary basis or helping us find a space that we can afford. So we really looked inward first, to our circles. And that is how we were able to initially find this great space at a great price. And I think that is key when you're a podcaster, because a lot of podcasters, I mean, some make a lot of money. We're talking Mark Maron, we're talking Joe Rogan. But if you're an independent podcaster, I think your first resource is your friends and family, but the ones who have been supportive in the past and the ones who maybe know what a podcast is and they're excited about your creative endeavors. And that's where we went to first. And having that pool of people resources has been extremely valuable.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been great.
So, Mike, I'm kind of curious if you could, for a moment, just talk a little bit about when I came on board the TV Dudes podcast. They were already a part of Permanent Record, and I just assumed that you guys had been doing this for years. But I found out right before that wasn't the case.
No, I mean, it's cool that you say that, but I guess we're a well-oiled machine by this point. But no, we actually celebrated our year anniversary this summer of being a cohesive network. I know the TV Dudes, a show that you recently joined, relatively recently, has actually been going strong for like 6 years. Yeah,
so I've been, I guess, your year anniversary for Permanent Record was about my year anniversary for the TV Dudes.
Okay.
And yeah, no, the TV Dudes started out as a trio, and their third and founding member moved to LA.
Right.
So for a long time, they were just rotating out co-hosts, and then we recently, and this is actually possibly related to what we're talking about. So we had a unique challenge with doing our podcast, which was you have 3 dedicated people recording a show every week. And anybody who's done a podcast knows that's not sustainable. I mean, there's always going to be things that come up. There's going to be holidays where you're going to take off podcasts. And we didn't want to have gap weeks or have to record 2 shows in 1 week. We wanted everything to be very topical and of the moment. So the solution was the series of rotating co-hosts that we had on our podcast. The 2 founding members, Grant and Randy, they chose 3 of us, me, Ashley, and Les, and we became part of a rotating cast. So now, on a regular schedule, I'm recording a podcast maybe once a month, twice a month, if I'm feeling up to it, unless somebody else drops out. And when somebody drops out, we now have 2 people on deck who aren't recording that week who can come and fill in. So I would never suggest a 5-person on my podcast.
On my podcast.
Yeah, I think 4 is challenging for a lot of people. Yeah. And even with 4, the best podcasts I have 4 people, there's always going to be somebody who isn't talking as much as the rest. But if you have a crew of 5 people and you rotate out a 3rd spot, or maybe you have a host and then you rotate out 2 of the spots, there's a lot of ways that you can get creative with it, and you can keep people coming back without getting burnt out.
Yeah, I think so. I think that is a great way to sustain a podcast long term, is to not only have a dedicated space like we do here and have enough room to fit in your entire crew where they sound good on the mic and they each have a mic, but to have a rotating set of co-hosts. So you have maybe 1 or at least 2, I would think, that are constant co-hosts, but then you can rotate that 3rd or 4th chair, so you always have somebody there, somebody who's dedicated to be there at a certain time. I think that's great. I think that's worked out really well for TV Dudes, and it makes like every episode fresh. because every episode you're like, is it going to be Kyle? Is it going to be Les? Is it going to be Ashley? Who's going to be in that third or fourth chair? You know?
Yeah, and the three of us that rotate most frequently, we tend to be kind of pretty different. Definitely the three of us kind of bring our own thing to the show. Now, that's one way you can do it, in the sense that we do a podcast about television, where weekly we are talking about the television shows of the day. But Mike takes a different approach to it, which I think is just as good, if not better, which is throughout the year, Mike, you do a series of shows, different podcasts that only run during the duration of whatever show the podcast is about.
Yeah.
So give an example. You can use any show.
I do all of our shows, all of our podcasts are about TV and TV shows. That's what we love. So I guess my biggest podcast is Mr. Roboto, which is at MrRobotPodcast.com. And
by the way, that season 3 promo where they have the emoji heads, that thing is awesome. If you haven't seen it, you probably have if you watch YouTube.
Yeah,
it pops up before every video.
Yeah, season 3 kicks off October 11th, and we'll have a podcast that week about that season premiere. So I'm looking forward to that. But yeah, I actually started a show, my first big foray into podcasting before I had the studio and before we built the network. I think a lot of people watching this can relate. I had a topic that I wanted to talk about, and I wanted to get my message out, right? And I used to be an entertainment journalist. I wrote for a number of websites and newspapers here in Texas. And I changed careers to work as a tech writer. So I was no longer writing about entertainment or being a TV critic like I was for several years. And I still had that itch I had to scratch talking about TV. So I was like, I don't have time to freelance for a magazine. And I'm writing all day at work. I want to get these views out and these opinions on these shows that I like somehow. So I looked to podcasting, and it just fit right in with my lifestyle and my schedule. I love tech, so it was fun playing with the tech. So my first podcast I did was called TVI. Some of you might have heard it. It was ranked pretty well in iTunes for a while. It was me and Nate Bliss. And it was a lot like TV Dudes, where we would talk about the TV of the day. And then we realized, we pivoted because we did a few episodes about Mr. Robot. And those were our most popular episodes. So we pivoted and made TVI a show that was completely dedicated to Mr. Robot, called Mr. Roboto. And then we just saw our audience explode. And it became really popular, to the point where I felt like that show had such a big audience. And then I had friends, like Kyle, like Grant from the TV Dudes, who also had large audiences. And I thought, if somebody's listening to Mr. Roboto, they're probably going to like TV Dudes. So we talked to these guys, we got together, and we decided we're going to share resources, we're going to share, hopefully, audience members, and just create a network. And that's, I guess, one of the big fruits of all that is this space, this studio. So yeah, that's one of the big reasons we built the studio. We can all work together in a cohesive space.
Okay. So we're talking mostly about the studio, but I do feel like there are some bits of information about recording a podcast based around television that are kind of nice. And, touching on what you're talking about, doing the Mr. Robot podcast and then realizing, oh, this is viable as its own show. Here's what's nice about that. When you do a general podcast, say it's just about television, you're at the mercy of the good TV. If bad TV comes out that week, you're talking about bad TV. But say you talk about a show like Mr. Robot, or I think the better example is Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones is a type of show that the people who watch that show, they're fanatical, and they're constantly interested and thirsty for more info. So where there might be 1 million podcasts out there that talk about TV, there might only be 20 podcasts out there that talk about Game of Thrones. And somebody who would listen to one of those podcasts is probably more likely to listen to another Game of Thrones podcast.
You want to niche down.
Yeah, than say somebody who's listening to a general TV podcast and would go hear somebody. You're going to find your people you like to listen to, and you're going to kind of gravitate towards those opinions, unless it's about a piece of content that you're interested, like Mr. Robot or like Game of Thrones, in which case you're probably going to want to hear diverse points of view and listen to multiple shows. So if you're interested in doing a show about television, what is the show of the day? What's the show that you and all your friends talk about? Is it Star Trek Discovery, Mr. Robot, Game of Thrones, Rick and Morty?
Little House on the Prairie.
Little House on the Prairie. Yeah, or maybe it's an older show. Maybe it's a show that was canceled before its time, that you and your friends feel like you're the only people who ever talk about it, like Terriers.
Terriers.
And then you put your podcast out there and see if you don't get the showrunners or, you know, people involved in the creation of that show who get interested and want to be involved. I want to say that is like, I started right after the Terriers project. If you don't know what we're talking about, Permanent Record, and more specifically, Grant and Randy and a bunch of other people did a podcast last year called Beach Cop Detectives, a Terriers podcast. And it was essentially a love letter to the show that just, you know, was killed before its time. And I think Randy really underestimated the amount of people who loved that show before he did the podcast. But sure enough, in doing that podcast, we got to see how many people really did love and appreciate this show. And eventually we got the creators involved, and that turned into a really fun experience itself.
I think one of the things that is great about podcasting, about TV, is that you always have content to talk about. I listen to a lot of podcasts, and sometimes you get a couple guys on the mic, and they're like, what are we going to talk about today? Well, if you're podcasting about TV, you always have content, like with Mr. Roboto. You know, when you listen to that podcast, we're going to break down that Mr. Robot episode bit by bit, and we're going to have fun doing it, right? If you listen to TV Dudes, you know you're going to listen to these guys talk about the premieres of the week and the TV of the day. You always have that specific content to talk about. And like you were referring to, what I do is I have podcasts dedicated to different shows that are on at different times.
Mm-hmm.
So certain months I'll be covering a Marvel show on the Marvel TV binge. Certain months I'll be covering Mr. Robot on Mr. Roboto. And in certain months I'll be doing Star Trek, because we're doing the new Star Trek Discovery pod. So it keeps it fresh for me as a podcaster.
Something else to consider too, this is something that no one in our studio or in our network has been doing yet, but I've been watching some of my favorite podcasters and YouTubers who will create this really great content. Again, I'm just going back to Game of Thrones because that tends to be a show that a lot of people can kind of relate to. If you don't watch it, you at least understand the fans of the show. So what I've seen people do is create really great Game of Thrones content during the season. And then that first week after the season ends, post another episode. Something about next season, this or that. And see if you can't build off that momentum. See if you can't retain your audience, you know, for weeks or months after that. And granted, yeah, if you're 6 months out after last season, 6 months before the next season, and nobody's listening to your show, then it's probably time to put it down and pick up something else. But, you know, being able to adapt and to kind of cater your content towards what people are actually listening to, and having the foresight and the intuition to pay attention to your analytics and get a grasp on what people are listening to, that's going to help you out big time in the long run.
It's certainly going to put you in the right direction. Of course, you know, you can have a conflict where your audience maybe identifies something that they like that you don't want to cover. You definitely don't want to do that. You don't want to do that because
unless you hate yourself.
You want to have a passion for what you're talking about and what you're spending all this time and potentially money about, right? I mean, potentially money, because we know that podcasting can cost some money.
Well, and there's no underestimating the amount of time that goes into this. And unfortunately, time is just that one thing. You know, the question earlier, money, time, or patience. You have to have a lot of patience, but you also have to understand that it's going to take time regardless. There's not a whole lot of, you know, quick and easy fixes to doing the podcast. If your show's an hour long, you've got at least 2 hours of work going into that 1 hour. And chances are that's if you're experienced and you've got it locked down. In the beginning, it's going to be a lot more than that. It's going to be several hours worth of work just to get 30 minutes, 20 minutes of content out.
But just like anything, the harder you work, usually the better the payoff is going to be, or the smarter you work. Like take for instance, and this goes back to another reason why we have the studio. We launched our Star Trek podcast last week, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we knew that CBS was going to air the first episode live Sunday night. And then it was going to air the second episode right after that. And we're like, okay, we are an established podcast network, but we're not established as being Star Trek fans or critics. So we have to get an audience for this, which means we have to be one of the first out of the gate with a podcast about the new Star Trek show as soon as we can. So what do? I gathered everyone who is on our Star Trek podcast here at the studio at our comfortable, dedicated space with a couch, with beer, and we watched the show live here. And right after that, we got on the mics. Of course, first we got into Star Trek cosplay and took a bunch of fun pictures, which you can find at StarTrekPod.com. But yeah, we brought everybody to the space. We watched the show. We made an event out of it. We ate and laughed and drank together and watched the show. And we're so pumped by the end of it that when we got on the mics, we didn't have to drive it anywhere. We're all here together in the studio. So we got on the mics and we recorded 3 podcast episodes that night.
Oh, wow.
One about the first episode of Star Trek, one about the second episode, and then a special bonus Patreon episode. So that's a ton of content.
Mm-hmm.
And by the time we're done recording all that, it was like, oh man, I can't believe we did this. Now we have to edit this.
The fun part.
The fun part. But what was great was that we were already in our dedicated space where we record. We watch the thing, we record about it, and then we can edit all in the same space. So Grant hung out for a while to help me edit. And since this place is so comfortable and we rent it out and it's our space, I was actually able to spend the night here.
For real?
Yeah. It took me like several hours to get those podcasts up, but it made a world of difference. We were one of the, if not the top Star Trek podcasts that day in iTunes. We got tons of new subscribers, tons of listeners for all that effort. And it was all because we could come together at a dedicated space and launch this project together. And we had a comfy futon that I could crash in. I could crash on after like 4 hours of editing. So it was great. And yeah, it definitely requires a lot of time and patience to be a podcaster who wants to see results. And depending on what type of results you're looking for, we're definitely looking for listeners. That's really what we want. We want listeners. We want listeners who engage and interact. And so far, with the way we've been doing this, running the network and putting out content that we would like to listen to, I think we're definitely achieving that. We're getting listeners who are very interactive with us.
Yeah. You know, this is a little off topic. I mean, it's all podcasting. None of it's off topic, but I want to share this tidbit you gave me this week, which blew my mind.
Okay.
The new iPhone update.
Oh, yeah.
To Siri. So do you want to go ahead and tell the audience what you told me? Or maybe just demonstrate.
Hey, Siri, subscribe me to the TV Dudes podcast.
Just to confirm, would you like to subscribe to the podcast, the TV Dudes podcast by the TV Dudes?
Yeah.
Oh, come on. Don't do the same thing they did at the launch this year.
The TV Dudes podcast.
Nice.
All right.
And now we have another subscriber. It is literally that easy now. Like,
Yeah.
if your listeners have got their phones updated,
iOS 11.
boom, there it is.
Yeah.
Now,
I was actually already subscribed to TV Dudes. That's why she hesitated.
oh,
And she was like, you're already subscribed. So,
nice.
Yeah. Yeah.
I tried to do that on my girlfriend's phone.
Yeah.
I was like, unlock your phone real quick.
Right.
Subscribe. And she didn't have her iTunes set up. I was so bummed.
Oh, okay.
But here's what's great. So if somebody is listening to your podcast, chances are they're either already subscribing or they're figuring out whether or not they would like to subscribe there. Okay? What's nice about this, what's nice about our podcast network is we have a schedule where we actually plan out for the month which podcast is going to talk about which other podcast.
Mhm.
So I'm more
or promo.
Yeah,
We'll promo.
promotionally. So now every week when we get on TV Dudes and we say, hey, this month we're promoting the new Star Trek Discovery Pod, we can say, tell Siri on your iPhone to subscribe to the podcast. And with minimal effort, frictionless effort, we've got new subscribers to our friend's show, and vice versa. Then on, that podcast or on Distro Roboto or something else, they do the same thing for TV Dudes. And then you can spread those listeners around. So it's another great reason to get involved with your friends and to network together your individual shows.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, one of the reasons we got together as a network is so we can, we all loved and supported each other's content, each other's podcasts. And what a better way to support each other than to promote each other on each other's shows. And it's not necessarily a requirement, but it's something that everybody wants to do. It's a holistic thing that buoys everybody up. So it's great.
Yeah.
And I think we're good. I think we're done. Hey there.
Hey, you Mike and Kyle, you guys crushed it, man. You just so many great insights and knowledges to building a podcast studio. Not only just challenges of building a studio, but also the challenges of building a podcast network, building a fan base, getting those that are closest to you. I think that was my big takeaway, is in having those people around you that are close and dedicated to helping you grow, friends, family, coworkers, whatever. I think that's a main point. I think sometimes as podcasters, we forget, hey, let's use the people closest to us to help build the studio, to help build the reputation of our brand and our podcast. So thank you guys so much for joining our International Podcast Day event. We really appreciate everything that you guys contributed today.
Thanks. Happy Podcast Day. Thanks for having us.
Happy Podcast Day, everyone.
Yeah. Oh, one final tip or thought. Where can people go to find you, your website? Where's the best way to find your work?
It's permanentrecord.com. That's permanentrcrd.com.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Or just yell into your Siri, subscribe to TV Dudes podcast or Star Trek Discovery Pod.
One of those. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's getting easier and easier. All right, guys, we appreciate it. Everybody continue to use hashtag International Podcast Day and continue to share the great message and celebrate the power of podcast. Again, thank you to our sponsors, Blueberry, Studio 21 Podcast Cafe, The Messengers, a podcast documentary, and Potable. Happy International Podcast Day, everybody.
Yay.